Well, fresh new worries today that the latest Russia controversy and the firing of James Comey may jeopardize President Trump's pro-growth agenda. But the White House says, get this, it's going to unveil its massive $1 trillion infrastructure plan in the coming weeks. And unlike health care and tax reform, infrastructure expected to get, you guessed it, bipartisan support. So can the White House stay on message and focus on making America great again? Well, let's bring back in Buck Sexton, Steve Cortes, and Chris Hahn. They're back with me right now. Steve, you know, a $1 trillion plan, all we know is it's going to be some kind of broad brush presentation from the White House. Maybe they need to come out with this sooner rather than later.
Right, Shirley, it's going to be huge, to quote the president, and it needs to be, by the way, because our economy really does need that. And I think if we make America grow again, by the way, which I'm confident we will, I think a lot of the noise that we've been hearing lately, whether it's Comey or the Russians, that is all going to disappear. I think the president was elected primarily on a mandate for real growth. Working Americans haven't had a pay raise since the year 2000. The last decade of slow growth has only really rewarded the very top of the economic food chain in America. So it's time for regular workers, the blue-collar workers who elected him. It's time for their wages to start growing. The way to do it, infrastructure and tax cuts. We're going to get both done this summer.
Chris, do you think that this is actually something that could garner bipartisan support? Remember, the last big infrastructure project we had was from President Barack Obama, and he believed wholeheartedly that, remember the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act? I mean, that's what President Obama believed. So can we get Democrats on board this time?
I'm sad that the president didn't lead with this. I would have loved to have supported him with this. But the president has forfeited any domestic agenda based on all these scandals he's got going on. And until that gets righted, the Congress won't focus on anything other than this. This will be a downward spiral domestically for the president for the next year.
Buck, you know, you're a radio host, and what do your callers tell you? Do they call into the show and say, I need to work, I need a raise? You know, do they talk about this type of need or want from the administration right now?
Well, they're certainly much more concerned with the Trump agenda as it relates to jobs and growth and dealing with immigration and things that they can see in their day-to-day lives than they are anything having to do with Trump or Russia. I would disagree with Steve. I don't think we're going to stop hearing about that no matter what Trump does. It's not necessarily Trump's fault, but I think that narrative is going to continue on well through the midterms, and I think that's largely its purpose. I do believe that there will be some bipartisan willingness on this issue because Democrats like spending. The problem Trump may run into, I think he will run into, first of all, we don't know the details, so it's hard to get much beyond just the general concept of a $1 trillion infrastructure package. But the Republicans aren't going to like this. It's big. Some Republicans, I should say, aren't going to like this. It's big spending. It's the government stepping in. We're already $20 trillion in debt. Now we're going to be adding to that. This is. I know they say public-private partnership, but you know, good luck with making that work.
Well, Steve, that's a good point. I mean, because you could argue that President Obama's infrastructure project didn't really move the needle when it came to jobs or economic growth. And although it sounds good on paper, and it sounded great on the campaign trail from President Trump, unless it actually equates to jobs, and that kind of was a debatable problem with President Obama's infrastructure spending, then he may not get that bipartisan support that he needs.
Right. No, and listen, I'm very sensitive to that criticism. I tend to lean libertarian within the Trump camp, and so I don't love growth in government. And let's face it, this is going to be a lot of spending by government. I think the difference is, though, and this is why Obama's didn't work, if we combine it, you have to combine it, you've got to throw the gasoline on the fire of tax cuts and deregulation. Deregulation is already happening, by the way. We don't have to wait on that. The tax cuts will come, and once they do, then we have an economy that can finally get turbocharged. You know, we've almost gotten used to mediocre economic growth in this country. You know, I'm a child of the 80s. We used to grow back then. We had fantastic hair, and we would grow as much as 7% in those days. We are capable of that kind of growth again. Maybe not 7, but I'm saying far higher than we have right now. We're better than that, and the president was elected to deliver.
Okay, Chris, you're telling me you didn't have 80s hair?
I had great hair in the 80s, but that was a long time ago. I was like a teenager. But look, I really wish we could get this through. I live in New York. I can't tell you how bad. We all know how bad it is here. We need a massive influx. In fact, Senator Schumer and Gillibrand just wrote a letter suggesting that we needed $50 billion to improve the subways and trains around New York City alone. And that is probably a low number for what we actually need here. But saying that we're going to do it through tax cuts and other kind of incentives is not right. I also want to disagree on the fact that Obama's didn't work. It did work. That's why we have 4.5% unemployment today.
I don't know that. I can't say that I really agree with you, Chris, on that point in particular, because we saw so many promises of project that was supposed to be. There was a bridge here in New York that was supposed to have 1,000 jobs and ended up having 75 jobs, and the Post exposed that. project, if you will. Really quick, Buck, before we go, I do want to ask you this. You know, I have to say Republicans are going to push back, I think, on the infrastructure plan, in particular because the debt, the deficit, and the fact that they don't want to see more spending at a time where they've got other political items that they've got to push through for votes for the midterms. That's health care and that's tax reform.
Yeah, and they have to deal with those issues, I think, ahead of any goodwill they think they can generate with the Democrats by some bipartisan, what will look like a bipartisan boondoggle to a lot of folks who are worried about the debt and what that's going to do to the economy.
And what did the controversy do to everyone's midterm prospects, whether you're Republican or Democrat? See, we're equal opportunity here. Buck, Steve, Chris, guys, thank you very much.